Hello everyone, Godre here, and this is my money brief. Yeah, so on today's money brief, I want to talk about the 2025 proposed budget. I don't want to call it the proposed budget. Anyway, the government recently released a document called Medium-Term Expenditure Program. I like to call it Medium-Term Expenditure Framework. That's what they used to call it before, but I think some people call it Medium-Term Expenditure Frame Program. But I mean, still the same thing. It's basically a document that sets the tone for how the government plans to run its fiscal policy, and it's like a 2-year plan. So it's the same way if you're a business, you have your 3-year plan or 4-year plan or 5-year plan. So the government also has its own plan. It's usually 2 years plan, and so the current MTEP, which is the first under this administration, as far as I'm concerned, is it's supposed to run between 2025 and 2027. It included a number of interesting data, interesting numbers. And I think these things all matter to you, and that's really why I'm doing this money brief, because you really need to understand every single major item on this number. So let's go, into it and look at the entire overview of their plan. So the government says that in 2025, they have this set of assumptions. Let's even look at the assumptions before I get into the budget itself, right? So assumptions usually pave the way for how they would plan their budget anyways. And so this particular year, they also came up with a set of assumptions, and they're very, very interesting assumptions. So the first assumption here is the crude oil price. So the government is saying in 2025, they expect crude oil price to be around $75 per barrel. It has averaged $77 per barrel in 2024. So maybe they're pretty much okay. 2026, they're expecting $76 per barrel. And then 2027, $75 per barrel. So they're kind of conservative when it comes to their assumptions. Now, bear in mind that there's a Donald Trump presidency lurking, and it's likely to come in next year. And Donald Trump has made it clear that he doesn't want to see higher oil prices. So perhaps this means that you might see a lot of crude oil production coming from the US, and that typically tends to impact prices. So I kind of feel like Donald Trump would like prices to hover around between $50 and $60 per barrel, but you never know. So Nigerian government is saying it's looking at $75 per barrel. Now, the next set of assumption is production. The government is saying they expect crude oil production to be around 2.06 million barrels per day. Now, in 2024, they budgeted 1.7. Guys, we're nowhere close to that today. We're around 1.4, 1.5, 1.3 sometimes. Of course, without including condensate and all those other things that oil and gas people tend to always explain to us. But we're nowhere close to these figures, and they're saying they are targeting 2 million barrels per day. Same thing in 2026, and in 2027, it kind of ramps up to 2.36 million barrels per day. And that's what they're projecting. I don't see how that happens. Anyway, exchange rate, they plan for $800, 800 naira to the dollar in 2024. We all know where it is. It's about 1,650 at the moment. So already that plan is off by 100%, right? Or 50% if you're looking at it from a depreciation standpoint. But in 2025, they're projecting 1,400. Surprisingly, 2026 and 2027, they're also projecting 1,400. I don't know what sort of confidence they have, but I hope that works out right. That is 1,400, because that's just going to be great for the economy. But something inside tells me that really can't work. It's going to be difficult to have that sort of stable exchange rate. And of course, the exchange rate can't really remain stable like that. It either goes up or down. But the government is saying 1,400. Then, of course, inflation rate. This year, they projected 21.4%. On the average, we're already closer to 30% than 21.4%, and we're currently at 33.8% or thereabouts. So, again, it appears that they've missed out, as far as I'm concerned, on inflation, because their projection is 15.75% for 2025, 14.2% for 2026, and 10% for 2027. That's audacious, man. So I don't know how they plan to achieve that. I mean, a lot of people believe prices will come down at some point. We can't keep going, all the way high this way. But second, a school of thought also says, look, we haven't seen the last of price increases. Speaking to some farmers recently, and they tell me that, look, first quarter of next season or first half of next season, before the harvest season, you're likely going to see food prices escalate again. And so I don't know, why they're this confident, but I hope it does work. And then, of course, in terms of GDP growth rate, the government is projecting 4.6%, slightly higher than the 3.9% or so the IMF says that we will grow at. Last year or this year, the projection was 3.8%. I think we're pretty much around that. We might just land slightly under. But the government is projecting 4.6% in 2025. Interestingly, 4.4% in 2026. And then it now jumps to 5.5% in 2027. I'm not really sure why you have those sort of, upswings for those years, especially when they still say exchange rate is going to remain flat and then inflation is likely to come down. So, but that's sort of like their projections for the next 2 years. So now that we're done with those projections, let's now go into the budget proper, what they plan to present to the National Assembly when the president submits his budget before the end of the year, I believe. Now, they're saying that they want to spend 47.9 trillion in 2027. That's the budget, 47.9 trillion. And the breakdown is recurrent expenditure 14.2 trillion, capital expenditure 16.4 trillion. Wait for it, debt service 15.3 trillion. So it appears we're now spending more on debt service than even recurrent expenditure. Recurrent expenditure, of course, is overheads like salaries and all these operational expenses that government MDs tend to spend on. But it appears now that we're going to see debt service cost more than recurrent expenditure. And this debt service appears to even be conservative, I think. And then, of course, capital expenditure, which we hardly meet anyway in terms of target, 16.4 trillion. Quite a very bold budget by the government. And, of course, other expenditure, 2 trillion. So that makes up the 47.9 trillion. Now, in dollar terms, this comes to maybe $30 billion. So not a lot in dollar terms, especially even if you wanted to compare it to the budget that we had in 2024, the current budget. The 2024 budget was around 35 trillion naira. So if you do the math, at maybe the exchange rate of about that they plan for this year, or the average exchange rate that we've seen, let's even use 1.2 or 1.1, it falls to around $30 billion. So in terms of, in dollar terms, the budget hasn't really changed, hasn't really increased. And I'm sure government people will tell you, look, I mean, nothing has really changed in terms of the budget. We're only just reflecting the times. We're just reflecting the exchange rate situation in the country. So it's not like we've really increased the budget, in real terms. But in naira terms, that is, more than a 10 trillion naira increase that we've seen here. Now, what is interesting as well is how they intend to pay for it. So the government says that it's targeting a revenue of 34.8 trillion. Remember, the budget is for the 7.9 trillion. It's targeting a revenue of 34.8 trillion naira. Now, what's the breakdown? Oil revenue, 19.6 trillion. Oil, non-oil taxes, which is VAT and PAT that you and I are likely going to pay. PAT goes to the state government. So it's VAT and PIT, PIT, personal income. PAT, I'm correct. Profit after tax and all that. So CIT is what it's called, CIT. I beg your pardon, CIT. So company income taxes and, of course, your VAT and withholding tax and all that. The one that accrues to the government, they plan to get 5.7 trillion naira from there, which, as far as I'm concerned, suggests that you're going to likely see more taxes being paid by Nigerians. Now, last 2024, the target for non-oil taxes was about 3.5 trillion. And so we're now looking at 5.7 trillion. So a huge leap there. And a lot of the reforms that the government is doing, I think it believes that they're going to be able to pay for those taxes from there. Let me start now by saying it looks like this is likely going to be a two-part show because there's a whole lot to unpack. And I haven't really gotten to area that is giving me concern, which is fiscal deficit and what it means for the exchange rate. I'm going to get to there on the second part of the show. So for now, that essentially is the budget. So for 7.9 trillion in expenditure and then revenue target, 34.8 trillion. So what does this all mean for you and I? I'm going to, break that down on the second part of this interesting or very important money brief. Thank you.